My name's Beverly Jones and I was the project officer working on the oral histories for Nene Park project. I'd worked on a previous project called 40 Years On, and that was an oral history project, and that was all about Peterborough's development. So it had a link really, because Nene Park was obviously part of that whole era. I think I realised we were probably at the cutting edge of town planning at quite an exciting time. I think Wyndham Thomas and his planners and architects and all those people did an amazing job. We did 13 interviews over the period of a couple of months, variety of people that had different memories of Nene Park. Some very interesting stories came out, and hopefully we've got some good information out there for people to use.
Yes, my name is Wyndham Thomas, and I was appointed General Manager of Peterborough Development Corporation in 1968. And I held the job for, I think, about 12 years. I toured the place to have a look, and I was dismayed by the bleakness, relatively, of the external atmosphere. It was flat, it was uninteresting. I thought that there was a great opportunity there to create a new landscape related to the River Nene. And one of the things that occurred was that we discovered that there was very good sand and gravel deposits in the Nene Valley area. And I had discussions with them and say, well, look, if sand and gravel is going to be dug out, you can't just leave sand pits. Let's make them into lakes. Let's have properly designated and properly landscaped lakes. And that's how the lakes came to be created. And then, as it developed and as it succeeded, I got, if anything, more ambitious in my wishes for this as an example for other places which were expanding and growing, that the landscape around should be developed not just for scenic purposes, but for a mixture of recreational and scenic and other historic things. And the opportunity presented by having that 2,500 acres was enormous, and one I've always been grateful for.
Well, I used to come here before Nene Park was actually here, because you needed to go along Ham Lane and carry on along the path, or a track which went to Milton Ferry, which was quite a place to go over a weekend maybe.
What sort of things did you do there?
Well, nothing really. It was just sit by in the river, and there was an ice cream van used to come in the 60s, and it was where people used to go before Ferry Meadows.
I suppose working at the Development Corporation, I knew about Nene Park. There were certainly lots of project teams, Nene Park project teams, steering group. I certainly can remember typing about it when I was there. I can't remember it in great detail. The first time I came to Nene Park was on a board visit. I had to come down and open the gate for the bus that brought the board members down. I don't know what year it was. It must have been the early 70s, because the park opened in 78, and certainly the lakes were being formed, because I can remember walking on the bottom of Overton when there was without water. So this is the one at this end, the one up opposite the visitor centre. So I can remember that, and I remember it was very stark. There wasn't a lot of landscape, but the elm trees were still, well, obviously they were still there, because they are still there now, but they're quite iconic, the elm trees, and we're very protective of them. They were there.
My biggest memory of that era would have been the summer of 76, when we used to go of an evening, which wasn't allowed, of course, but we used to go swimming across the lakes. Parents weren't very keen on it, but I was at that age. These days you wouldn't have got anywhere near it because of the health and safety things, but in those days, when the workmen had gone home, we'd go swimming across the lakes. Lots of the things that happened in Peterborough in those days weren't all that good. No, lots and lots of houses taking up lots and lots of land, which is something I'm never keen on. But the park seemed a good idea, but I don't think anyone realised what a good idea it was at the time.
We came here in 1980 with our two daughters. We bought a trailer tent and we came to camp at the caravan site as it is today. And it was like Beirut. There was all these little tiny trees with plastic wrappers around the bottom of them. There was sandbanks and gravel everywhere because it had been converted from a gravel pit. And honestly, it was like Beirut. It was awful. We said, we're never going to come back here.
I remember coming over shopping to Peterborough with my parents. We lived in Stamford, driving along the old A47 when it used to dip down past Milton Ferry Bridge. And it was sort of a lot closer to the park than it is nowadays. Now it's a dual carriageway. And I do remember seeing these diggers and all this work going on and sort of wondering what was going on, and sort of then picking up the story of what's happening, and the creation of this new park and the development of Peterborough City Centre and things like that. I was working at Rutland Water on the nature reserve there, and I had been for 10 years, and I saw this advert for a state worker, put in my application, didn't think anything of it. Then the phone rang and I thought, oh, here it goes, and he said, would you like to consider a different role? He said, well, I'm thinking of creating a role as visitor services officer. He said, we need somebody on the visitor. There's nobody really doing anything with the visitor services side of the park at all. So would you like to come in and have a chat about it? And we'll take it from there. And I thought, well, if somebody phones you up and offers you a job like that, completely new, never, it's yours. You can make of it what you want. Well, I had to go for it, really. So, that's how I started. Sort of first 10 years here as visitor services officer.
I'd been in the park one day and I'd called into the office to see some of the ladies that I used to work with before, and I don't know, we just had a conversation anyway. About a week or so later I had a phone call from Morris, and he said, I just wondered if you could do a favour for me. My secretary's just left. Why don't you come in and we'll have a chat and see if we can work something out. And so I did. So I hadn't been here very long when they appointed a visitor services officer, Chris Park, and that was it really. That's all there were, and it was. Apart from being secretary to Morris, because I was the only person in the office, me and Chris, you just had to sort of do the best you can. I suppose in a way, we didn't get an awful lot of direction, but we could see what was required outside.
There was nothing in the way of leaflets. There was the makings of a guided walk programme. So it was setting all of that up and getting things in motion, and as part of it, we had this idea of Glynis himself doing part life.
You'll have seen that Nene Park now produces something twice a year called Park Life. Chris and I started that up many, many moons ago. We spoke to the general manager and said, would it be all right? Because we thought that the public would like to know what was going on, a little bit of background about who worked here, what we did, how we were set up, why we did what we did. And he said no, he didn't think that was a good idea, that it wouldn't be sustainable. So, rightly or wrongly, Chris and I did it anyway. He didn't used to see it. But I think he did come across it at one point, and I think he thought, he said, that's quite good, isn't it? So sometimes you just have to, really.
I can tell you something about the railway. There was a station here up until 1964. It was demolished, and the last passenger train went along this particular line in 1966, and the last freight train went along the line in 1972. And after that it was obviously taken over by the Nene Valley Railway, which is quite a draw to the area.
I can remember seeing in the sidings at Nene Valley Railway Station, I don't remember the advert for Dulux paint, where the train went underneath a bridge, and when it came out the other end, every carriage was a different colour. Oh, right. And for ages that was in Ferry Meadows Station, and it was only painted on one side because you only saw one side of the train.
And I suppose the other highlight regarding the Nene Valley Railway was the filming of a James Bond film, Octopussy, in 1983. So that probably helped to put the Nene Park on the map, as it were.
Went through Dalton's Weekly looking for a business, and I found this river cruise business, and I had all these grand ideas about places around the country where it would be, and it turned out to be Peterborough, which is about 27 miles away from our house. You know, I didn't realise, to be honest, at that stage, that there was a river big enough to have a cruise boat. And I rang the chap up who owned it, and we met, went up and down the river, went home and said to the wife, "I've just bought a boat." And she said, "Who's going to crew it?" I said, "Well, you are, of course." And she said, "No, I don't like boats. You're not going to get me on a boat." So I enlisted the son-in-law to help me, and inevitably the wife came down to give us a hand with the painting and alterations, and then, as the good ladies do, she sort of took over and spent 9 years with it. We lovingly call it a booze cruiser because it would carry 64 people. People would come on and do half-hour public trips, which weren't very successful in the city, but very, very successful in the park. And in the evenings we would do just ordinary booze cruises with parties who were celebrating all manner of things. Birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, funerals, ashes scatterings, all sorts of strange things we'd done on the boat, you know. We used to do half-hour public trips from the jetty by the Green Cafe, out at the lake, down the river. We'd take people down to have a look at the boats at the boat club, or the lock, which is the first lock on the system on the River Nene, or the River Nene as we call it, because I'm from Northamptonshire. Or other times we'd go out the park and turn left and take them up, have some nice views of Milton Ferry Bridge and the osier beds and things like that. And they were very popular. You know, people used to come back quite regularly and enjoyed it. We used to give a half-hour commentary about the history of the park and the river and various things they'd see on the way. Lots of wildlife. People used to see things from the boat that they didn't normally see. Well, we had a guy come on one day. He'd spent 3 days down at Slimbridge at the RSPB Reserve looking for some nice photographs of kingfishers. And he popped on our boat with his wife. I've got to say, reluctantly, he didn't want to go on the boat. And within 10 minutes, he'd got a kingfisher about 3 feet from the end of his camera lens.
Well, I got into bird watching maybe when I was about 7 or 8. There was a bird in the garden, which happened to be a pied wagtail, which I didn't know what it was at the time. So my father said, "Well, we'll get a book and we'll find out." And that's how it started, really. Last week there was a ring ouzel here, which is quite rare. Everybody got excited, and I found a really extremely pretty bird, which is called a redstart, the male, which was really nice the other evening. Everybody rushed down for that, and that's how it is.
Well, I'm passionate about wildlife, and it's nice to meet other people in the park that are as well. The birds and the wildlife are always going to be part of the park. I was walking again along by the side of the river, along the side of Hanmere, and there was a huge big swirl in the water. You know, just you think, well, that's a big fish. But then a grey head came up, and it was a common seal. Really? Don't expect to see seals this far inland, but no, it's a common seal, and it spent quite a few days in the lakes. So a lot of people saw it.
Oh, we had Peggy with the horses. I'm sure you've heard of Peggy with her horses. Yeah, Peggy with the horses. They used to come trotting down the road every day with all her little stable girls, and we used to look forward to the days when Peggy wasn't here, because when she wasn't here we got more people on the boat. Because folks used to stick their kids on the horses for, I don't know, about 50 or 60 pence, but it cost them £1 to put them on the boat. So we used to suffer a bit when Peggy was here with the horses, but she was a good sort. I spent quite a few hours sitting in her little wooden hut talking to Peggy about all sorts of things. When we first came, Christine was still there with the cafe, and she had the ice cream kiosk halfway down the road towards the other lake. And of course we had the paddle boats on the middle lake in those days, the little kiddies paddle boats. So there was a lot going off in the park. It was a very, very busy place in those days as well, because we hadn't quite got into this Sunday trading and all-day pubs and all the rest of it, which seems to have changed things quite a bit now.
So how long were you working on the boat?
9 years.
9 years?
Yeah, 9 years on the boat, and then I sold it, retired, and bought the railway in November. We knew nothing about railways, and I think the term is a steep learning curve. Well, the train kept falling off the track,
Right.
because the track was in a terrible state, and some of the rolling stock wasn't that much better, and it was in a day, if we had 2 or 3 derailments, we thought that was a good day. And I had a chance meeting with a guy off the Nene Valley Railway, and although he worked on large railways, he gave me quite a few tips, things to look for, things to do, and after he'd done that, more of it fell into place. We spent a lot of time working on the track, and then it got easier after that.
And the rowing course, that was one of those brain waves of the Development Corporation, because what happened was the rowing club used to be on the embankment just behind the swimming pool where that big flyover is, at the Frank Perkins Parkway flyover. The flyover went through the middle of the rowing club building for a start, but then because of the piers had displaced whatever there was floodplain, they had to build a balancing lake. And some brainy person said, well, let's just not build a hole in the ground, let's build a rowing course. So that rowing course is the balancing lake for what they lost from the floodplain.
I've got 1 or 2 favourite parts of the park. One or two that I don't get out into it anywhere near as much as I'd like to. Hanmere, I spend a lot of time walking at lunchtime down at Hanmere, and you see the changes, and I've seen changes sort of throughout the seasons from year to year, and you think, and it does change, but it's just brilliant, what you can see in half an hour in the park.
When we bought the train, we sold our narrowboat, because obviously working every weekend, we never got any pleasure out of the narrowboat anymore, so we sold that and bought a caravan, and the first place we came to stop was Ferry Meadows.
How was it then that time?
Better than the first time. A lot better than the first time, yeah.
And it's often referred to by everybody I speak to as apart from the cathedral, as the jewel in the crown of Peterborough, which I think is a fair description.
The great thing about Nene Park was that we were able to create a single enterprise in terms of the totality of the park and its physical content and the way it was administered, and the creation of the Nene Park Trust to run it independently of the council was, in the end, the triumphant thing, because the Nene Park Trust has that single sole responsibility to care for the Nene Park and to go on to improve it. And I think if that had happened in some of the other new towns for their big social enterprises, they would have been much better off too. But I do think that was a very, very beneficial thing to do, not just for Peterborough, but for the very much larger area around, for which this is now a central area for recreation and the enjoyment of amenities. And the Development Corporation's legacy is manifest there, I think, more than anywhere else.
I think to actually hear the words spoken from the person that's experienced it just adds such another dimension. It really, really does. You can read an article, you make your own interpretations, you can look at photographs, but you can't get all the answers. If you have the opportunity to speak to somebody who can remember it, it's still their interpretation, but it just brings it to life. I found with all the people we interviewed, Many were nervous, weren't sure, and why had they bothered to, agree to it. But once they got going and they started to remember, it's just so healthy. They enjoyed it, reminiscing, they laughed a lot, they smiled. But also for families, they've got that sort of spoken word forever as part of their family history. So, all those questions we think, I wish I'd asked that, I wish I'd done that. There was the opportunity to get that down. I just think oral histories are amazing, and they can be so informal, it's more of a chat. We said it's more of a recorded conversation. And it just adds a whole new dimension that you can really... And accents come across, and laughter comes across. You can't get that in the printed sort of words. So whilst it's important to have all different sort of mediums, I think oral history really brings the life into the history.